Going live.
That's right. It's restart.
Right. Right. Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui to everybody here and around the world watching this this briefing. If you'd like to join me in our karakia tēnatanga. All right, so we have for this briefing, we have briefing on the community events information plan, and then a briefing on the plan change 12 coastal hazard update, and then third the industrial interface plan change. We also have apologies from Alex Hewson, who's unable to be here, and also lateness from Kelly Bell. And I haven't heard from Councillor Donnelly. All right, well, our first briefing is on the community events information plan. So we have Lucy, Mark and Tanya. If you'd like to join us at the end of the table, feel free to take those names off the table.
Oh, can I choose one? Yeah, that one. Yeah, one each. The presentation, Cindy. Oh, you did. Good. Thank you.
Well, guys.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi.
Over to you.
Awesome.
I'll ask members to hold their questions until you give us the all clear.
Great, that'd be awesome. Kia ora koutou. I'm Lucy Blackmore, the manager of events and arts at council, and here with me today I've got Mark Royal, who's the team leader of events production, and Tanya Chokke, who's the team leader of events partnerships. So we're here to provide an update on the development of the reviewed and revised community events implementation plan. Oh, good. The Community Events Implementation Plan accompanies the event policy framework. The purpose of this plan is to describe the goals and actions the council will pursue in the development and production of community events in Christchurch and Banks Peninsula. And the operational areas of focus we have around sponsorship, grants, permits, marketing, and event delivery. Oh, wrong one. Cool. The events policies framework vision is to create a more vibrant city through memorable events. To achieve this, the framework sets out a number of high-level goals for events. The theme of these goals include create vibrant events and support local talent to emerge and thrive in Ōtautahi, enhancing its vibrancy, inclusive event calendar, develop a balanced schedule of accessible and socially inclusive events year-round that reflect Ōtautahi's diversity, enhance event-friendly reputation, which is to establish Ōtautahi as a welcoming and easy-to-navigate place for hosting events with streamlined permitting process, and promote sustainability, ensure events are considering environmentally sustainable and encourage the use of public, active and shared transport, and align events with community outcomes, so ensure all events support one or more of the council's outcomes. In developing this plan, we considered event feedback from the past few years from attendees, participants, organisers. We also sought to align the plan with council's community outcomes. As part of this plan's development process, an externally statistically representative survey was commissioned to identify how Ōtautahi and Banks Peninsula residents feel about events the council currently produce and sponsor. The survey sought to establish who is attending council-produced and supported events, what they value, and their overall thoughts on what their overall thoughts are on the Ōtautahi events calendar. The insights obtained through this research have been used to inform the development of a 5-year community events program of activity. Our primary interest is in the events that council should continue, develop, stop, or start. So up here, we've got some of the high-level results that we got from the representative survey. So music, concerts and food festivals events were in the top categories named for additional events. We had 60% that were in favour of continuing to celebrate New Brighton fireworks event, with agreement that New Brighton was the best place for it. All respondents from the coastal ward agreed that New Brighton is a suitable place for the council to hold events. So that was good. I'm quite happy about that. And there was also a high agreement amongst Burwood and Linwood respondents, and high agreement amongst Rickett and Central and Heathcote as well. So there was quite a general consensus in that space. Residents indicated they were generally happy with the location of events. And also the access to events, although parking was identified as a barrier for event attendance due to the cost and distance. And we've had increasing interest in what's on website and social media as a way for people to hear about events and the popularity of that space. Some of the other data that we got back that's more generalised and not specific to the area was that 66% of residents are satisfied with the range of events available in Christchurch. 62% agree that there's enough variety in the events that council produces. 75% agree that council events are well spread out across the year. 72% agree that there's a range of events in the calendar that will appeal to a range of different people, age groups, cultures. One of the highest factors influencing the decision to attend an event in Christchurch is to experience something new. Sparks was scored the highest percentage as a favourite council-produced event, and that was actually reflected in the event we had over the weekend with, I think we recorded 24,000 in attendance, which is significantly higher than previous years. 59% of residents supported the concept of some events currently held annually instead being held on alternate years to provide opportunities for new events to be introduced into the calendar. And then 31 of the total 100 had no opinion either way of that. For music events, those who were interested in an increase in that activity were supportive of both ticketed and free, although ticketed at a low cost. And 64% agree that council should continue to incorporate fireworks displays into some of their events. The Community Events Implementation Plan was initially developed in 2019, and it's intended to be reviewed and refreshed. So following the recent 23-24 review of current council practices, we identified several key areas for future focus. So we've honed in on dynamic, which is to collaborate and create a dynamic events portfolio that evolves with the community and industry needs. Creative, which was offering platforms for artistic expression, cultural celebration, and community creativity. Being energetic, which is infusing energy into events to engage and excite participants and audiences. Inspiring, which is lead by example in sustainable event practices, reducing emissions and waste and enhancing community resilience. And unique, which is to foster event partnerships that power the community and industry, contributing to a distinctive Ōtautahi event ecosystem. And support, provide tools and support to engage the diverse community and increase participation. The Community Events Implementation Plan outlines a 5-year program of work, and we've identified 3 goals that will be developed for this implementation plan, which will help achieve high-level goals for the events policy framework. Actions to achieve these goals have been developed with key tasks and timing noted. The lead team for each action and additional support that's identified has also been worked through. So that's the likes of Christchurch NZ, Venues Ōtautahi, or Arts Centre, or other external collaborators. So for goal 1, the dynamic delivery of a dynamic events portfolio with the ability to evolve alongside community and industry needs. These are the key action areas that we've planned to focus on, and then we have some additional tasks and timelines around that. So to celebrate creativity by providing platforms that showcase talent, fostering pathways to a vibrant community, exploring collaborative partnerships to create new opportunities, a dynamic calendar goal. Council-produced events are sustainable and strive to lead the way in the event sector. Review events produced by council events production team to ensure a diverse program with a wide demographic reach. Review the partnership model for the delivery of Te Rama Mai, and engage with city partners to review what a partnership could look like for an autumn celebration in 2027. So that's focused around the events that we deliver. Oh, it doesn't like me now. Oh, the clickers. Goal 2, that's the one.
So try clicking now to see if it.
There we go. Success.
What happened there?
So on this slide, we've got a couple of our fantastic event casuals. I had to put them in it because they've just been outstanding. Vanessa and SJ. Sisters. Yeah. Yeah, they do look really like. Cool. So for goal 2, this is focused around our sponsorship and our grants, and that's to enable partnerships that empower the industry to deliver uniquely Ototahi events for the community. And some of the action areas are to work in partnership with the event sector to support delivery of events, identify events that have the potential to be developed through City Identity Fund, enhance the accessibility, clarity and consistency of the event funding application process, foster cross-departmental collaboration to align event funding with council-wide funding strategies, and review the community board-funded events. And then our final goal, which is goal 3, which focuses a lot around the permitting process and the bidding and support for event organisers. Position Ototahi as an events powerhouse by promoting best practice and championing for the industry and our environment with bold advocacy. And the action areas that we're focused on for these is to continue to reduce waste at events through promoting sustainable practices, review the event permit process and event spaces, actively seek new event opportunities for the city that align with the bidding criteria, enhance year-round utilisation of key council facilities with the new event opportunities, upskill the sector by coordinating regular workshops, promote events and activities through awareness of the event website, reignite the volunteer sector in Ototahi, and collaborate with internal council units to conduct an analysis of event spaces available to event organisers and how they're utilised. So the next steps from here will be that we'll finalise the draft community events implementation plan, working with various stakeholders who have fed into the development of it. We'll be presenting the plan to various council leadership teams, and then we will be seeking sign-off from the executive leadership team on the plan, and we'll be circulating the finalised plan with elected members. And that's us. Yeah, open to any questions around all of that.
I just wanted to ask about what is review community board funded events? What does that entail?
So in that plan, I'm not sure if the question was coming along, but for that one, it's similar to what they did last time. So it's having a look at the whole, looking at each of the community board events and how it works. So the recreation advisors and how it works, it's just reviewing how the events look in the calendar. So that's the one that the community development team had fed into and put those points in.
Yeah, so I guess is a higher level review, or is it looking at every event specifically?
I think it's a higher level review. I can pull out some of the actions. So so there were ones that Jess Garrett had fed into in the plan, and my understanding was that it was a higher level review just to check in on processes, see if there are efficiencies, looking at how they're working with all the stakeholders to refine that program.
Thank you. And my second question before I hand over to Celeste is just what do you mean by reignite the volunteer sector?
So one of the things that we've identified from one of the larger events we bid for recently, Special Olympics, was they were really keen to link in with volunteers for the event. And we realised we haven't got a strong database to be able to help pull in some of those volunteers, but also retain them for other events when there's opportunities that come through and people would like that work experience to be a part of events that happen, or external events need extra support to come in. So what we're looking at is how we can develop a system. We've been talking with Venues Otautahi and Christchurch NZ about this as well for the major events that come through, just to see if we can get a really strong database for people that can be tapped into for those events.
Thank you, Celeste.
It sounds like it's going to be a lot of work. So thanks so much. I really appreciate all the work that's gone into all the events. We're very lucky and right on this thing. We definitely have the premier events, and the kite day was fantastic. So thank you for that. 2 quick questions. In terms of community outcomes, in terms of accessibility and disability access, how do we, is there like a sort of a way that we can, is it considered as part of the event framework?
Yes.
Yeah.
So accessibility is going to be an area that we're doing some more work on.
Right.
Yeah.
And the other quick one is the City Identity Fund, which is quite interesting. Has that been set up?
It has.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Yeah,
And do we, with when this plan's coming through, will we feed into it in terms of like awareness, or do we just see the final draft?
it's at this stage, it would be so it gets signed off by ELT and it would be the final draft, but I'm happy to circulate it for feedback if you wanted to have a look through.
Yeah, it'd be quite interesting, because I think there's a few events that it'd be interesting to see where they end up landing, like the Duke Festival, for instance. It's kind of going from strength to strength, but it's still a community event, whether we can look at something like that, or the coast to coast through the city identity fund. Gotcha. You know, where these things sit now.
Yeah,
You're at the right level, and yeah, things like the Santa Parade, I think, kind of fall outside a lot of things, which I guess is why that fund's been set up.
yeah, definitely. So I think it would be
Yeah.
really helpful through some of the points that we have in there where we're doing reviews and looking at it, getting more information to feed into any decisions that are made.
Cool, thank you.
Jan and Joe. Yeah, Joe.
Yeah, thanks. I was interested if you looked at the geographic spread of where the events were taking place and if you highlighted any gaps in that research.
So we focused predominantly on Central City for the events that we deliver, and also from the permitting perspective, but that's where we're mostly oversubscribed, and we're trying to find other spaces that we can find because they're less utilised and what are good for it. But we can do some more work on
So I
that.
think of like, you know, like we just had Nostalgia Festival, like obviously really
It's great.
awesome event happening in that kind of a different area. You've got quite a few in Brighton, Red Zone, QE2, kind of out this way, but other pockets of the city where you think like maybe there would be a better case for an event just to kind of bring people together or showcase.
Yeah, well, I think that comes under the point about looking at those event spaces, because we have identified that possibly it is people aren't aware of other spaces, or can we develop it? So looking at Red Zone, that trial called Sector 7 was to try and establish a new space that could be used for events to go to. I think the first event coming through for that is Urban Jungle, isn't it? Yeah, to see how that goes, and if it does, then we could look at what infrastructure is required to make that another event space that can be utilised, and then through the implementation, and we're trying to continue to do that to find other spaces.
And then the other thing that just for some people, I don't know where it's got to, but the increased cost of traffic management and just the whole way in which events get done, the compliance cost. Is there any work going on? Like in the past, I know councils looked at things like providing a traffic management trailer or something with, you know, equipment to help people with a lower cost, or we looked at buying grandstands for temporary capacity for some events. Like, is there any work going on to looking at how do we reduce the cost of events being put on so we can get more events?
I think, yeah, the traffic management one has been tricky. We have had a couple of meetings with them and explained that is an area we're going to be working on as a priority in the implementation plan. So they've fed into the event permitting space and what that looks like. I think it's tricky because for the traffic management, it is the on-site stuff, but then also, as you've experienced, buying and purchasing equipment can be quite challenging, or pose its challenges as well, just with the upkeep and the responsibility around that. So it's just that fine balancing act of what we can feasibly purchase and make sure it's utilised well and what we can't, but definitely can do more consideration into that one. But it is trying to make events accessible and affordable. And we have noticed that that is one area that can be really
And the challenge too with, as we experienced in the weekend with the inner city is capacity management. You know, we think we've established a strong TMP plan that works for multiple events, say in Agley Park. And then we ended up with 6,000 or 7,000 more people attending a free event. And then so other problems come up that we have to re-review and then work, okay, we now need a larger plan to appease other areas of, you know, we've got parking infringements and all that sort of thing. So it's a constant kind of moving target really to manage that and increasing expense for the events team, I guess, as well as private events.
Yeah, like I was surprised there wasn't more road closures for longer. I guess that would be my feedback from
With Sparks?
With Sparks, like I was quite surprised at how soon the roads. But anyway, if have you got like we've only just got the PowerPoint up on the screen, but is there actually a report with all the details and the information? Like, are we able to get a copy of that?
Yes, I'll circulate the draft plan. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. With the fireworks event out here, have you thought about actually changing the date so it's not so cold in the middle of winter?
So we changed the date of it to winter to try and, one of the key reasons was feedback that it was too late and people really struggled to keep their kids up late enough to be able to go to the event. And it also posed a few challenges at night time with so many people being out that late. So that's when we identified winter as a really good time. We have at the moment aligned it to school holidays. So we sort of do it either as an opening or closing kids fest style event. And it really helps from a marketing perspective as well, because it gets captured in that. We haven't had feedback about people being too cold, but that's attendance has been really high.
Attendance wise, it hasn't impacted in the last couple, like it's been consistently.
It seems
Yeah.
because I live out here and I see all the traffic and I just see people parking, it doesn't seem like there's as much, there's a lot of parking still available for people in
Right.
different places where it used to be chocker.
I like that feedback because it's not
Yeah.
quite what we get back from.
Yeah.
We can't get any park.
Well, just better than it used to be, I've noticed, and,
Right.
and, you know, they're saying that it is cold to take wee ones out. in the
Yeah,
winter.
it's the flip side.
But there's kind of a flip side of
That
it.
there's enough parking in New Brighton.
There isn't sometimes. And the other thing is with the concerts, they take their private events held at QE2?
Yep.
Okay, so are they in charge of the cleaning and the alcohol?
Yep.
Policy?
They go through a whole event permit process, and all of those regulatory requirements are seen through by one of our advisors, and they go through council through all the various departments.
So how do we send someone out within the next day or two to make sure that they've cleaned up properly?
After the one that's coming up now.
Well, after any of them.
Yep, so a lot of them are cancelled, a lot of them have, you'll be aware. So we've got one coming up, which I think is called Dimension, might be the next one coming up. And we have an advisor who does a pre-site inspection with the event organisers and the parks people, and they all agree on the standard of the site before the event, and they do the same after the event as well. And the event organisers are given like a grace period, a couple of days to clean up the site. If they don't do it, they will arrange for it to be done and they'll be charged.
Because there has been a bit of an issue with
In the past,
with bottles and cans all over the place.
Yep, so we're very careful about that now.
So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to live in a city that puts on events, especially free events. But not everybody pay. So, awesome. Well, thanks.
Yeah.
for coming on board.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
The Titanic was great too.
Wasn't it? Yeah, that was my favourite summer theatre.
Yeah, it's the highest attended summer theatre we've had in years. We had over 10,000 people through the site. So
Wow.
really, really great feedback for that show.
Yeah.
And what worked really nice on the archery lawn this time, like there's a bit more awareness of people coming to the gardens because the first big open space that they come into.
Since the last 10 minutes, it was okay. Not easy.
You what happened?
You're not going to get your money back.
Thanks a lot. Don't give it away.
So next we have plan change 12, the coastal hazards update. We have Sarah, Anita and Emily here. If you'd like to join us at the end of the table, you're welcome.
Okay, Joe.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us. And we've got two plan changes to talk through with you today. First up is coastal hazards plan change 12, which has been around for a while. So I'll just
Well, I'll ask members to just hold questions until you give us the all clear, so you don't worry about being.
it's fine. It's fine. We can ask questions either at the end or as we go through. I'm perfectly
Well, how about you? I'll give you opportunity to get into it a bit.
okay.
And then just give me a look, and then you can have questions. Just because both of these plan changes are very dear to the hearts of most of the members around the table. So.
And
Potentially lots of questions.
I recognise we've only got half an hour for each, so we'll try and move fast through it. So I'm Sarah Oliver, I'm City Planning Team Leader, Anita Hansbury, Senior Planner, Emily Stevens is a Policy Planner. So we're just going to cover today what the purpose and the scope is of Plan Change 12. I know you're probably all familiar with it. Where we're at, our revised approach and next steps. So as you're aware, coastal hazard management has occurred through coastal adaptation planning, and you would have been well updated and briefed on the adaptation plan program, asset management planning, emergency management, local area planning, and what we're here to talk about is the district plan. So this plan change is considering new development, that is new land use activity, subdivision and earthworks that are enabled in the district plan. So we're looking at reviewing what is permitted, controlled, restricted discretionary and discretionary non-compliant and prohibited. It cannot remove existing use rights, so only a regional plan can do that. And it's about focusing on managing activities until such time as other decisions are made. And we come back to that because that has a little bit to do with our revised approach and thinking around this plan change. So I've shown you two processes there. In a perfect world, we would do adaptation planning and then we would do a district plan change. We're not in a perfect world, and where it's complicated and we constantly have legislative change or no change. So what I've sort of set out there is more like our real world situation where we've got the district plan. We may do a change, and I'm sort of indicating the first blue line there might show the plan change 12 at the moment. Then we know adaptation planning will be ongoing. Alongside that, there may be local area planning that might occur at some stage for an area. And then at the end of that, we may need to do further changes to the district plan. So it's never there's never an end really to planning. As you also, I'm sure you've been briefed before, we are giving effect to the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement. And that is at one of the key objectives there is to ensure that coastal risks are managed, locating new development away from areas prone to such risks. We have to look at coastal hazard risks within as a minimum, the next 100 years. And in affected areas, avoid increasing the risk of harm from coastal hazards, avoid redevelopment or change in land use that would increase the risk of adverse effects. So those are one of the key policies that this plan change is having regard to. The Supreme Court is quite important in this plan change. Now, there has been some big Supreme Court case decisions, and they have looked at the term avoid. And I won't go into too much detail, but through the plan change, certainly our Section 32 evaluation, and that's the big evaluation that we have to undertake, we do have to have very close regard to what the Supreme Court have been saying. They continue to uphold directing avoidance, but they do point out that the Coastal Policy Statement also provides for enablement of communities with conditions. So they're saying that mitigation or consent conditions can be demonstrated to avoid increasing risk. So through the district plan, we need to also point out where that flexibility in terms of our policy application occurs. And we need to be clear, make sure that we're clear about that. And we need to balance the direction of avoiding risk, but also having close regard to enabling the community to be able to provide for itself, particularly in the face of uncertainty, because nobody has a crystal ball. We don't have a crystal ball as planners, and we need to acknowledge the fact that we don't actually know what the sea level rise will eventually be over that 100 years. So we need to plan within that uncertainty. So we're examining the impacts but importantly, the impacts of constraining new development. So that could be anything from expanding, I'll get into this a wee bit, expanding a preschool, that could be putting new doctors, that could be, and then you have the residential, whether you can put a garage on, an extension, subdividing your properties, a new house, multi-unit development, and the list goes on. So deciding what's most appropriate is still our ultimate test through this plan change, what's most efficient and effective, all things evaluated. I'm just highlighting here that the Section 32 evaluation, before we even come up with our district plan, any rules in the plan or any new policies, we must evaluate the benefits and costs for environmental, economic, social and cultural. We also must consider any economic growth that's anticipated to be provided for through a change to the plan, but also reduced, and employment that may be anticipated to be provided for or reduced. So if we take away development rights, we need to have evaluated those very comprehensively. And when we're doing that, we have to quantify as best we can the benefits and costs. We must assess the risks of acting and not acting. And if there is uncertain or insufficient information about the subject matter. So the bar for this Section 32 assessment is very high, particularly when if we deem the most appropriate approach is to take away or reduce development rights. And you can't do that unless you've had it well justified. And to date, a lot of work has gone in to identify high risk or low, medium risk, low risk areas based on different scenarios of sea level rise. And that's what's occurred to date. So there's been a lot of work with the Jacobs and the Tonkin and Taylor reports of identifying spatial extents of impacted areas. But in terms of the economic, social and cultural assessments, they have not actually been undertaken to the extent necessary, or the necessary that we feel, to justify, I guess, any plan change at the moment, or any particular provision, particularly anything reducing development rights.
Right. For us to be able to determine what rules or what restrictions, potential restrictions would be appropriate for areas affected by coastal hazards, we need to understand the effects of those hazards, and they can be quite complex. I think that the most obvious one is the sea level rise that most of us are familiar with as a concept, and then that's been modelled to the point where we know that the 0.6 sea level rise is quite certain within a reasonably short period of time, and no one is prepared to give you a date, but it's you know, the number of, say, 30 or 40 years rather than 100. And that is associated with higher risk because of that certainty. Any higher sea level rise up to 1.2 meters, which is predicted to be within the 100-year timeframe, is less certain, and therefore areas affected by that potential sea level rise or that level of sea level rise are considered to be at medium risk of coastal hazards. The other factors that may affect the sea level rise and the effects associated with it include rising groundwater, and that picture on the right-hand side will show you how that happens. So if the sea level rises, the salt water pushes onto freshwater, pushing the freshwater table up, and obviously from the seaside it causes effects such as higher tide, storm surges, breaking any potential defences along the coast and causing more frequent flooding on the land, land side of the sea. Another change that, or another effect of the coastal hazards is tidal flooding changes. Tidal flooding mean where the mean high water springs line will sit. With the sea level rise, that's obviously going to go towards the land further and further, and some areas that are perhaps flatter would be subject to more flooding associated with the change of the coastal line of the water, of the tidal line. And another effect is intrusion of salt water into the freshwater reservoirs. Now, Christchurch has got very deep aquifers, and the sea is potentially more likely to intrude into that aquifer with the sea level rise than perhaps in areas with shallower aquifers under their cities. Now, vertical land movement is a reasonably new concept, and that hasn't been monitored for very long. We only have data since 2015. That's associated with the earthquakes. So we know that some of the land post-earthquakes is still sinking. Some areas are more affected by that than others. For example, South Shore is known to be sinking by about 8 millimeters a year, as opposed to other areas which are subject to 1 millimeter change a year, such as, for example, Sumner. So that varies, and there may be some difficulties in incorporating that knowledge into the potential predicted effects of coastal hazards, because we have no certainty about how long that vertical land movement is going to last for. It may finish in 2 years' time. It may carry on for another 20 years' time. And obviously the effects of that would be felt in some areas more than others. With another effect of environmental effect of coastal hazards is obviously the effect on infrastructure, such as your pipework, your three waters, your roading, or any infrastructure on top of the land. Some of that infrastructure may be more prone to damage from coastal hazards or water intrusion. Other parts of the infrastructure may last longer and not be affected so quickly. The next slide is probably going to show you a little bit clear, in a more clear way, how the effect of sea level rise affects the groundwater levels. As you can see, the darker blue shows the current groundwater level, and above that would be the land that is capable of absorbing any rainfall and driving it away from the land. The moment that groundwater level rises to the lines shown in light blue, you can see that causes flooding on the surface because the water is already above the ground level in that central area where the cloud is. And obviously the capacity of the land to absorb and drive rainwater away from the surface of the land is diminished. Therefore, your flooding is going to be more intense and spread in wider areas. The Plan Change 14 that you may have heard of, that is dealing with residential intensification, has already introduced overlays showing the extent of high and medium risk coastal hazards. What you see on that map is just an example of high risk areas in orange, which may be subject to in sea level rise and associated effects quicker. The grey area is medium risk area, and that will probably not be affected so quickly. That is just a fragment of the area of the whole of Christchurch. So it's just to show you an example of how different areas might be affected.
So the coastal hazard management areas that were put in or introduced through Plan Change 14 were introduced as a management control to avoid greater intensification. As you would have been briefed or aware, hopefully very aware of Plan Change 14, medium density within those areas, the IHP recommended they actually supported council and that greater intensification wouldn't occur in those impacted areas and including the tsunami risk area. Now, I'm going to talk too much about tsunami risk. We have to come back because we don't have enough time to get into that. But in terms of, so that was good. That's a positive. Putting that all aside though, because we're still in Plan Change 14 process, and that means that we've still got to go through the process of because we've only decided on the policy 3 that's around the New Brighton area in this area and around the commercial centres. What we do know, what Anita's just basically alluding to, all of those factors are still live matters that we have to consider when identify any hazard management areas for this plan change as well. So all of that's under review. So there are no set in stone coastal management areas. We certainly know with vertical land movement what Jacobs consultants have said is in some areas, if the vertical land movement is dropping in some locations, the medium risk areas may turn to higher risk because they may be impacted quicker. That is the sort of thing that we have to just consider, whether those lines on the map need to change, but we need further review. So that's going to take a bit more time. Just pass. Yep.
Are you ready to take some questions?
Yes.
All right, so question from Joe.
Yeah, just in relation to that in the data, is it going to be updated on the new data that Felt have done? That Felt.com? With the accretion and erosion around New Zealand?
Otherwise, yes. Well, the thing with erosion, for planning, yes, erosion may be very important for coastal adaptation planning. When it comes to district plans, the erosion areas are maybe less of a concern to do with managing activities because a lot of the erosion, if areas are eroding, then it could have the impact of where there may be some protection, that protection may be lost, and therefore the coastal inundation may occur because a lot of the modelling has a whole lot of assumptions built into it. So what we may need to do is ask some questions of the models and pose some scenarios. So if that coastal erosion was actually going to remove, say, a barrier that's there or some sort of protection, and or if it wasn't, that's the other alternative, then yes, we may need to ask the model and see what impact that means for these areas at risk. Because if it's not going to impact or it's going to be 250 years off, then what our thinking will be is, do we need to restrict activities in a way? Exactly. So we may need to factor those things in. The difficulty that we have through this plan change is the time scale and getting into that level of detail, because it may differ from property to property to property. And in the past, we've looked at flood management areas that may need to be determined or looked at in more detail. Say if someone makes a submission, we may look to their site and say, yes, we've reviewed your site. I can understand that's updated information and change the lines or the management areas in that way.
So will we be looking to actually get updated report from Jacobson?
Yes,
before doing this.
Yes.
Process.
So at the moment we are scoping out what that revised work will be. We were waiting. We do have to wait for other work to be commissioned. For example, we were waiting for the whole of Banks Peninsula in terms of the CHAP program. So a lot of the CHAP programs work, they've come to speak to you about all the work that they're planning to do. Some of that we need to occur so we can feed into our plan change to give us certainty, but then other work can continue because we can still continue with, for example, what Emily's going to bring.
And the other thing about sea level rise and groundwater rise, am I wrong to say that this is going to happen upriver as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yes,
so it doesn't just affect the coastal
absolutely
water.
Not. In fact, the last briefing we had from the technical experts was some of the most impacted areas is the groundwater plume that's actually increasing up the river, through the river corridor.
So do we get that information included in the coastal hazards tool? Or because at the moment it's just a slice of the coastal area that's actually online and it doesn't show the extent
correct.
of this.
So there's the risk, the coastal, I call it the risk explorer, but the tool that's out there that has that inland extent that for various reasons been drawn, but remembering also the council has its other plan changes and the district plan is sort of a bit agnostic to the inland, or it just manages hazards across whether you're inland or to the coast. So it's just managing across the whole district rather than, the scope and the boundaries are a bit variable.
People are unaware that that's going to affect them. It's not just going to affect us.
Absolutely not. So, no. Groundwater is
at the moment,
hard to map.
The tool that would show the extent of, say, groundwater rising and the tidal effects further inland is only available to the staff, if you like. CHIP people are really interested in coastal areas because that's where they are, if you like, constrained to or restricted to. So we may have to be looking at updating or providing another updated platform that people can view to be able to view, for example, the effects along Avon River, the further from the estuary you go in, because there are actually quite significant effects in that area.
Would it be Hereford as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
So there is, you'll be aware, or I'm not sure if you've been briefed on Plan Change 17. That's reviewing the flood management areas. So we work with the flood management engineers as well, and so that's doing a stage one of updating the flood management areas, because whether it's flooding from the top or the bottom, or what we're looking at and managing is the effects of that. And when they're combined, it doesn't really matter where it's coming from. It's how is that impacting the land use? And so we're working across different plan changes as well. And it may be that we need to, the district plan could just have a management area it doesn't matter whether it's coming fluvial, or coastal. It's just a management area that you need to do X, Y, and Z. The district plan at the moment splits things out depending on where the impact is coming from. For example, rockfall, rock, or.
Well, I understand that we need to have something in place, but we also, I think, as elected members and staff, we actually need to have the actual data about how we're tracking against predictions.
Yes.
And it's really important that we have that to actually make accurate decisions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Celeste?
I'm jumping ahead to the other slide, which is around the timing, but just curious to know around, in terms of the socio-economic assessments that you mentioned, not quite sure how that works and what the community engagement part of that looks like. But it looks like it's quite a short time frame. Would that be fair? So it sounds like you guys are under the gun. This needs to be handled by September. The draft.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so the time frame has been in a way dictated to us that this is a priority plan change, and our staff we were all pulled off onto plan change 14, so this had to take a back seat, and so there's just a lot of pressure, and that is, I mean, maybe we can get on to how much time it actually takes to do that is something that would be very good to discuss with you all, because we have our concerns, I guess, as staff trying to get through this all in such a short time frame. But maybe that's something that councillors might want to consider when, the time frame for this, because we are working very, very hard to try and progress this. And if it needs to take more time, I think that's important to hopefully.
Yeah, the September deadline was pretty much dictated by election time and how long the current.
But that's going to run in this election. It's going to run into difficulty anyway in terms of that time frame. So we're just aiming to try and get the draft plan change ready for a draft plan change ready in September. So then it will be up to council to see how it takes it through. We may have to review that if without taking Emily's wind, but that when she starts talking through what we actually propose to do, you will hopefully acknowledge the fact that to do that well, we need to work with everyone to do that, work with the community and most impacted, and to talk through these options.
Because my feedback would be that I'd be concerned that we would rush, not because of anything to do with staff, but because of how much has been going on. We're rushing something that's really important. We don't want to rush, particularly the part that involves engaging with community. And also with the chat program starting, it seems like it's a natural process to align those when you can. So how do we feed into, is this something that we'd get advice on later on?
So when you say that, have we got an update around the chat program in East Side Christchurch?
Well, we've got funding on budget to start doing that work, but because of the timing,
Okay, that's good.
So I don't know when that's happening, but according to the diagram, these things are kind of supposed to be running, not in parallel, but roughly around the same time.
They can. So just going back to the first slide, what we're focusing this is a transition type plan change, recognising that after adaptation planning and when council may make decisions, quite important decisions on assets, and that all has to happen in the future. And that could take a long time for those decisions to be made. In the meantime, the district plan still needs to manage new activities. So we still, regardless of those decisions, because we do not know when those decisions will be made.
Yes, no, I understand.
So the
Might be a bit complex. I think my thing was around the data that we used. So you mentioned for Whakaroa Harbour, you took the data and that's been fed into the district plan work. Yes, is that correct? Yeah, so therefore, I imagine we'll do something similar here, but again, it's just constraints of time, and it's my concern.
It is, and I mean, we also have to make a call. We will never have perfect data, so it may be looking at options to manage with the information that we have, and we can come back. We're going to probably take a bit more time to talk that through, but there are options to manage with uncertainty with data and not have perfect data. It's how you're managing those activities, and we may put, we'll just probably talk through those options when we've got more options in terms of mapping, because vertical land movement, for example, might not actually change that much for us to have to change spatial areas.
Would there be another opportunity to meet with staff to get a better understanding of the process?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And maybe a
We've-
workshop,
Yes,
if we've done with other.
Yep.
Like
We
that
would-
IT was really helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Once we have a better draft, if you like, of the proposed rules and can focus on things that may be of concern, then we will go out to discuss that with the communities and community boards. And
I was just hoping before we get to
the process, you're talking about the process,
actual
absolutely.
process and understanding if there does need to be more time taken.
Yeah.
Is it just that's the hard deadline, or is there scope, and where is that scope?
There's always scope to
Okay.
move deadlines. We've moved deadlines before.
Right.
There's lots of inputs to moving deadlines. It is.
Thanks.
Before I go back to you, Joe, Tim's got a question, and then I'll, and then we need to go on to the next. So we'll have a 2-minute break after Joe's question, and then we'll go on to the next one. But sorry, we just need to make sure we have time for the second item.
Information gathering. Are we also looking at the rest of New Zealand and saying, well, you're very similar, so comparing
Oh,
and
yes,
sharing?
yes. So we certainly are reviewing how other councils are managing impacts or managing risk. It's different. Every council is different, how they've approached it, and
not many of them have gone very far.
we're actually still reasonably advanced.
Yeah.
In terms
So
of
government-wise, is the government saying hurry up, or what's happening there?
Not really, no, because the legislation, we were expecting some legislative change and that hasn't occurred. The RMA still is going to be changing, the government's indicated. I'm not sure whether in this space we're going to see much change that will change the process that we have to go through in terms of looking at the 4 well-beings, for example. We still have to do these tests under the Act. Yeah.
All right.
Do we?
Thank you. Do you have some more presentation to go?
We do, but we may need to, we can just quickly skim through it.
Yeah, as your question.
Yeah,
okay.
So I'll try and do it quickly now. I planned on doing it quickly, but that's okay. So we have had a socioeconomic impact assessment done by formative consultants. It was a desktop impact assessment, so it didn't talk to the community, but it has given us an idea of possible social and economic effects of changing land use in coastal hazard areas. And a key recommendation to come out from that report is still being peer reviewed. We're hopefully going to get it to you by the end of this week. And we do have a draft executive summary that's available for you to have a look at. But the recommendation from that report was that these likely effects be tested with the community. And so that's what we are scoping up now. And we're starting to think about what that test might look like. And you have a draft scope as well available to have a look at. Essentially, it's going to be a workshopping exercise. And we want to get a group of people, 40 to 60 people in the same room. And that group will have extensive experience and expertise covering environmental, social, economic and cultural domains. And we want technical knowledge, but we also want lived local knowledge as well in there too. So the idea is that we have community members alongside subject matter experts and officials assessing options and identifying impacts together, and that will be facilitated by an independent practitioner who will talk them through the multi-criteria assessment tool. But then the group throughout the process makes recommendations that are fed back to planners, who then make changes where they can and then feed that back. So it's an iterative process, it's transparent. So we've got 2 main goals of that process, and that's to reach a shared understanding of the issues and options with key stakeholders prior to wider community engagement. And that's shown to be really important in when engaging with the community around risk. And secondly, to enable the impact assessment to meaningfully feed into option development and evaluation for our Section 32 process. So that's me racing through it, but we also have to identify and consider the cultural effects as well of options, and conversations have happened with MKT, and that was during previous drafting of PC12 provisions, but those conversations were not about identifying likely effects of the options. And it's worth noting that the IHP for PC14 identified that possible impacts on urban Māori had not been sufficiently assessed for PC14. So our next steps are to engage Whiti Ora and MKT to commission a deep cultural impact assessment. And timing is very important because we need recommendations to feed into our Section 32 process. And so it can't happen at the end of it.
And it says,
Yeah.
I know the particularly says urban Māori, so not only talking about Mana Whenua, you're talking about like Ngāi and Uhura Marae, and as well as a bunch of other different iwi organisations like like Tūhoe and Otetahi and stuff.
Yeah, much like
your final question now?
Yeah, just in regards to that process sounds very, very similar to chair process.
Yeah.
Are we better not to do them combined? Or?
We do need to acknowledge the fact that the district plan is different to adaptation plans. So the district plan sets the rules and the policies for managing new activity. Adaptation, there's some overlap, but there's also some very distinct. We are not determining through the district plan whether a house can stay or go, and council through its asset management planning as well will be determining levels of service and making decisions on the long-term functionality or investment into infrastructure. So there are different parts. That's why I'm sort of saying there's lots of different complex parts to and a lot of different decision-making pathways. So the district plan, yes, we acknowledge adaptation planning, and adaptation plans, particularly their technical assessments, can be useful for district planning processes. But we are a statutory process. We have to follow a pretty standard, specified, directed process. Adaptation planning, I guess, has more broad, but they are different.
I guess just finally to pick up on Joe's point, and I think it's something that we've talked about before, is that you've got these three different things or more going on. You want to be talking to many of the same people. So how can you at least link those up so you're not repeating the same questions?
Certainly, yes, absolutely. If we're talking about some of the technical information that feeds into each process, absolutely. But we are very soon going to be narrowing down as into policy options and rule options and spatial extents, hazard management overlays. There will be it's quite different conversation in some way, because we'll just get to the options. Because our plan, the district plan change, has to, part of the work, we need the engagement to actually help identify and help us develop these options, different approaches. So yes, it's very complex and we've thought about it, and yes, some engagement may be useful no matter across the board, but certainly, again, we are a statutory process. We do need to undertake these assessments. They are also the assessments that we have form our evidence base that can be challenged in as far up to the Supreme Court, to the Environment Court. So when we do things, we actually need them to meet a certain bar as planners, because we actually have to defend anything that the council puts forward. So our evidence, as I said, the bar for us is quite high, and we need quite a lot of technical evidence and these assessments to actually be undertaken to be comprehensive.
All right, well, thank you. We'll just have a 2-minute break before we move on to the next bit.
Just have to quickly finish off. about the work that we're doing, and this goes into the time frame. One thing that was missing up to now too has been for us to remove development rights, we actually need to understand about the vulnerability and long-term functionality of infrastructure. For example, if we know that an area that we have low, we have high certainty that infrastructure is going to be highly vulnerable, we know that the impacts of that infrastructure is going to be highly compromised, that could be grounds for us to reduce development rights under the district plan. On the other side, if we cannot determine that infrastructure is going to be highly impacted or the functionality is going to be, and we don't have enough evidence base to suggest it, that actually may be grounds not to reduce development rights or enablement in the district plan. So we, in terms of, we have actually limited understanding. We know that infrastructure is going to be more vulnerable in some locations, but we don't know what the impact of that is. So we're commissioning quite a large piece of work that's going to be used to inform this plan change as well. So we're scoping that infrastructure assessment. Again, we'll have to come back once that has gone through the process, but that's going to be quite a major input into this plan change. You've been presented with other options back in 2021. We're taking a deeper dive, a more granular approach into those options, and we're actually looking at a new option, which is a trigger-based approach. And this is more akin to the adaptation, where you may not remove rights until certain triggers have been met. So we're actually looking at how we might incorporate that as an option and develop that as an option. And that's could be quite positive in terms of planning with uncertainty. So that is something we're looking at. It wasn't an option previously, but that is certainly one we're looking to develop because we want to test these things. We want to test to say, why shouldn't you have a garage? Why shouldn't you be allowed a seagull here? Why can't it be relocated? Can't the district plan provide for these things until such time as X, Y, and Z happens? Equally, the same with preschool. What's highly sensitive? Is it a hall? Is it a shop? Is it a preschool? Maybe. Is it a medical centre? Like what are these sensitive activities? So we're testing that. Previously, none of that evaluation has actually occurred. So we're making sure again that this assessment is going to be quite comprehensive. And again, we were going to get into and tell you about how that risk-based trigger-based policy and rule approach might work in practice, but we don't have time, so we'll come back to you. But that is certainly one of those options we want to work with this group, this working group, what would we call it? The socioeconomic group. We don't have a name, you can come up with a name. The group that we want to test. We want to test to see whether this option is something that you want us to develop and see if we can make it work in the district plan.
I think I can tell you now, yes, please.
Yes.
Can I just one simple question?
The problem is that Yanni also had a question which I didn't allow, and we are running out of time, and we're going to get onto Yanni's pet subject, which I also want to get onto.
So just because this question is relevant to both, and it's more just a process question. But do we have any advice around conflicts of interest with members around if we own property within the areas that you're talking about? I'll just let you ponder it all with Ray, but it would be good for us to get advice because we don't want to create any unnecessary risks.
I would say we want to hear from those most impacted. This is not a situation, it's not making a decision. This is a socioeconomic assessment, which is evidence-based that goes in. Planners then utilise that. It is about.
And I would say it's such a big picture that it's an interest in common with the public. It's if you own the whole swathe of green parade.
I just have to ask.
Are insurers involved in the conversation?
Everybody's just leaving.
I think it's just during a break.
Well, we hadn't finished yet. But we will have a 2-minute break now. Come back.
So insurance companies, are they involved in it?
Brittany, you're here as well. Would like to come to the end of the table? We will get started so that we can hopefully progress. As you know, this is something particularly important to us Linwood people. I'll just go to comment. We don't want to talk about how long it's taken to get here. We're here now, so I'm happy to be in your hands.
Okay. Just welcoming Penny Rackhout to the photo. No, sorry. I can't remember.
We need to finish at 4:30. Yeah, I just wonder if there's anything in particular you'd like us to focus on, because we've got quite a few slides, about 30 slides. If there's any real specific focus areas, just before Sarah gets started.
There is lots. I guess, we know that the district plan changes can't do anything about existing activities. So the issues that we've been dealing with, at least what we want to know is how it's proposing to restrict the kinds of things like piles of shipping containers, organic processing, stuff that, there's dust and there's noise and vibration, and how it's proposing to mitigate that for our communities which live alongside industrial areas, particularly in Bromley and Woolston. Yanni might have something.
I mean, I think, probably three things, but one is I'd be really interested in understanding the use of adjoining, because it's also within what distance, for example, next to industrial or residential, that I think is a question in my mind. So just understanding how we use that phrase and what that means. The second is understanding what we may not be able to cover in the district plan that we may be able to cover through other mechanisms like a bylaw in terms of controlling some of the activities around maybe licensing or if there are things that we can do in the district plan. But my reading of it seems pretty limited what we can actually do to mitigate the impact. And then the third is just how soon we can get something in place and whether or not we should focus specifically on the issue in the notice of motion, which is on shipping containers, and do it quickly versus doing the wider plan change, which will take longer.
Great.
Yeah. So if you want to give us a pretty quick rundown and then stop questions, we may or may not have time for questions, but then we can send questions to you. You can just
we're just going to take all these ones as read. It's just saying, as said, this is enforcement as well as what's new development. You've had those slides before. You're very familiar with what's enabled within the different zones. Yes.
Well, we know that the general industrial familiar with that one.
Okay, so the general industrial, these zones changed from the city plan, then there was independent here at the first district plan review. The zones actually changed. They used to be called business 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then they moved and they got amalgamated into these zones. So a lot of what has happened has occurred through a previous independent hearings panel, district plan review, and just other directions. So the general zone is supposed to act as a buffer or design or intended, it's quite interesting, it's intended to act as a buffer between residential areas and the heavy zone.
Oh, good.
And the heavy so the nature and limited effects. So it's supposed to, it's intended to have more controls in it than in the heavy zone. And the heavy zones was designed, it used to be the business 5 zone, I think, once upon a time, and it was really there to have the most, those activities that can generate the most effects. And the industrial park zone was where you expect higher amenity. And those are more the technology and the industrial, the warehousing and logistics sometimes. And that's how the district planned. So that's just indicating are in the city, but there's different zones and different locations. So some of them is quite historical, and some of them have, I guess the rules have changed within those zones over time. That's just really saying that the district plan objectives are pretty sound. We don't think they need necessarily changing. And there's one policy which Brittany's going to talk about, but the zoning and the rules actually do, or the policies do say about managing effects. However, there is a policy that says, you know, adjacent to industrial areas, you might not get the same level of amenity as what you might be in some other areas, just due to the location, and that's been there in place for those existing activities in some locations for a very long time. And it just sort of covers there in this slide about the range of standards that are in the district plan that manage activities. Alongside the district plan, this might be getting to your point, Councillor, in terms of the district plan can work with it can do other things. We can work more proactively with existing businesses, industrial operators. We can prepare best practice guidelines, so we can use our advisory and advocacy role, or in some cases we could invest in mitigation measures. So that could be a range of things, but that will come with a cost. Just saying there, this one's just saying that, or indicating the fact that some things are permitted activities, quite a lot is permitted activities, and then there will be some standards. So some heavy industrial is generally avoided in your park and that general zone, because again, that was intended to be a buffer. Do you want to take over?
Thank you. Great. So a couple of things I wanted to mention here. Key thing that you're already aware probably of the impacts of industrial next to residential, different things like visual impact, noise, odour. I've got in that table up there just some examples of noise complaints, and you'll see that they sort of occur during the day, during the night, from different activities. And I just...
There's one thing that just so that I don't forget, the plan needs some vibration standards.
So we have some advice around vibration as well. We've got a consultant who has looked at noise and vibration from us, so we can get into that as well. Yep, so that's other complaints. I've received at least a couple about vibration. And I just wanted to mention, you'll see in the table it talks about compliant versus non-compliant. So there are cases of complaints where the noise is actually complying with the current district plan noise limits. Yes, so this is sort of showing a buffer. Maybe I'll zoom in this one here. So you can see sort of a 500 metre, 250 metre, 100 metre buffer. And that's sort of where the complaints tend to drop off, about the 500 metre mark. But even within, say, about 100 metres is where we typically find the most complaints coming up at the interface. And so, as you'll know, there are some activities that potentially aren't suitable right next to or over the road or over the river from residential. And another point is that currently there's no height limit on outdoor storage. So things like containers, also scrap metal, there's no height limit. So this is what the current rules do. So you've got some landscaping, you've got a building height, no height on outdoor storage. One point I wanted to note about noise, I'm not sure how many of you are aware with the noise rules. We have a rule for the industrial side, like they have their own higher noise limits. And then on the residential side, they've got their lesser limits. And so where industrial noise is received in the residential zone, it would need to comply with the residential noise limits.
Yep.
So the lesser limits. And those are just some quick examples of sort of outdoor storage and different activities right at the interface. These ones are where it's over the road from industrial. So you've got like solid fencing blocking any sort of landscaping and just different heights and activities you can do there. And this is where you're, where you have a adjoining boundary of industrial residential. So again, you've got building height limit. You do have some landscaping, so trees every 10 metres, but outdoor storage can go sort of in that nook between the trees and there's no height limit there. And these are some examples just at the boundary. Sorry, I'll just grab my notes for this one. So this is going back to what Sarah was talking about, how we do have a policy at the moment that talks about the expectation that there is lower amenity at the interface. And it's sort of who is perceiving what is lower amenity and whether it is actually more impactful for some people. And the rules aren't really aligned with still protecting amenity while acknowledging its lower amenity. Sort of at what point is it acceptable? I don't know if that makes sense to you, but so here's a list of a few key issues, but the main thing is that the zoning framework is too enabling of different things. So for example, you can have up to 250 heavy vehicle movements right at the interface. The industrial activity definition itself is really broad, so there are so many different activities that could take place. And also the noise rules don't take into account special audible characteristics. So those are sort of your unusual noises, bangs, clangs, thumps. So we do have advice on what would be covered, what wouldn't be covered under that. I think those are the key things. Oh, sorry, just one more thing. We're not sort of in this area, or Woolston, yeah, where we do have some industrial heavy right next to residential. So there is actually no industrial general zone to buffer. We do have a handful of small sort of issues that are really minor and we can fix up. So we've got a water supply for firefighting rule that doesn't allow for acceptable alternative solutions, need consent unnecessarily. So there are some sort of examples where you need consent and you shouldn't need to. And then also within the industrial zones themselves, there are some activities that aren't clearly set out that we wouldn't necessarily want them in that zone. So residential activity, guest accommodation. So we do have technical expert input. I won't go into detail now. Happy to talk to you later if you wanted to go into detail about any of those, if you have any specific questions. So we do have noise, vibration, transport and landscape. And we also do have some comments on the bylaws as well. So there's one for heavy vehicles in residential streets. There's a prohibition in some areas, say like all around Bromley.
Ignored, but
so yeah, whether it's sufficient and effective, the bylaw. So there are a few options, and so there's the proposed plan change. There's also a version where we just do really minimal changes now, and also looking at potential controls on the residential side, so potentially similar to the industrial interface qualifying matter for PC14. And another option could be to do some rezoning, but the main one we're looking at is the plan change, which a key thing is changing an industrial policy. So this is very initial draft, so the wording will change, but we're really just looking at improving the amenity at the interface over time. So, and ensuring we avoid significant adverse effects. So there's a whole bunch of new rules that we're looking at, and this page here is just looking at the controls on the industrial activities. So container yards and heavy industrial activities, we're looking at a 200-metre distance where if they want to be within that 200 metres, they'll need consent and there'll be assessment matters. And industrial heavy activity itself will have a few activities added. This list is still just initial. There could be more things added to that list. And also a restriction we're looking at is to do with heavy vehicles and machinery use. So especially during those more sensitive nighttime hours, we would say no to that unless they apply for consent, and also sort of a lower number of heavy vehicles at the interface, so not 250 a day. And that's sort of an idea of what it might look like. So, sorry, this is where we've got new built form controls. So outdoor storage would put in a height limit, improve the landscaping as well, and also adding to the noise rules incorporating the special audible characteristics. So that will only be over residential zones where it's industrial noise. So we're not changing the whole, all the zones, just this one. And then within industrial zones themselves, we're looking at increasing tree canopy cover and just making some changes so that that can happen. And then those small minor issues I was talking about before, we're just going to improve those. I'll go through next steps and then can go back to anything that I went over quickly. So we're doing our pre-notification engagement in February, and then we're going to update our evaluation and rules, taking into account that engagement. And then we have a council briefing in March, and then if council decide they want to continue with the plan change, it will be notified mid-April.
Well, yeah, we've only got a couple of minutes, but it's so like it's a relief to have this process started, and yeah, really interested to feed into that, and make sure that our community are able to feed into that and detailing just why and the effects on their lives. I mean, we know about Auckland organic processing plant, but you know there are a lot of other activities in those two areas, and also in particular, but also in Waitangi. So really keen to find ways that we can feed in, maybe not in the usual way, but just to ensure that you have enough of the context, the social context. And I also wanted to ask if there is a way that we can have maybe a bit of a chat with you, any of the community board who might be interested to sit down and just have a chat with you about it, so we can make sure we understand it, so that when we are talking to people about it, we can do a good job. And see if there's anything here for us. I've got time for one question from Yanni, and then we have a notified public meeting starting.
I mean, just very quickly, yeah, I'd welcome some more time, but it's good to get the instruction. The special auditor characteristic, what are you proposing to do for that?
Okay, so the residential noise limits that we have currently, say 55 dBA, what happens with special audible characteristics is if you have an activity that has some sort of noise, that special audible characteristics is basically a penalty. So it's a 5 decibel penalty. So what that would mean is, say just for an example, forklifts right now, it might comply with the district plan if it's beeping right next to residential. If you apply the special audible characteristics, suddenly it might not comply with the district plan. I can explain it later on if you'd like. It's a little bit technical.
Yeah. It touches on that whole vibration, that short, intermittent, really noisy sound.
Yeah, those sort of unusual sounds. That's right. Yeah.
And at the moment, it's really hard for enforcement to meet with the community's expectation of enforcement. It sounds like you're finding a way to do that, so that's great. Right. Well, thank you very much for coming aboard.
Thank you.
For another discussion with you. The community board meeting will start in 2 minutes. No, I'll reopen. Thank you.